January 17th, 1893. The sun rises over Honolulu Harbor, casting light on a sovereign nation. By sundown, it's a corporate asset. No bombs, no soldiers storming the beaches, no war. Just boardrooms, sugar deals, and political favors. Sounds like fiction, right? But this is exactly how the Dole name, now slapped on pineapples across the world, became a symbol of Hawaiian paradise by erasing the kingdom that created it. This isn't just a story about imperialism, it's a case study in how business, diplomacy, and military force can quietly dismantle a nation. To understand what was stolen, you have to understand what Hawaii was before 1893. It wasn't some remote island with grass huts and tribal drums, like the old stereotypes would have you believe. Hawaii was a modern, globally recognized constitutional monarchy. It had its own currency, postal system, legislature, and standing army. It had embassies in London, Paris, and Tokyo. In 1843, both Britain and France formally acknowledged Hawaii as an independent nation. That put it on the map. Literally. By the late 1800s, the sugar industry was booming. Millions of dollars flowed through its plantations. Native Hawaiians had some of the highest literacy rates in the world, even higher than parts of Europe. The monarchy built hospitals, funded public education, and installed telegraph lines, long before many areas on the US mainland had them. But all that progress came with a price tag, and there were people lining up to collect. American businessmen began arriving as missionaries in the 1820s. Some came to save souls, others came to seize land. Their descendants came to own over 90% of Hawaii's farmable land. By 1893, sugar wasn't just big business. It was the engine of the Hawaiian economy feeding America's growing sweet tooth. American-run companies like Castle & Cook, Alexander & Baldwin, and C. Brewer & Company controlled the land, the labor, and the laws. They were called the Big Five, and they answered to no one, not even the crown. The sugar barons had the money, they had the influence, and soon they'd have the Marines. Sanford Dole was no ordinary settler. He was a Harvard-educated lawyer and a sitting justice on Hawaii's Supreme Court. And yes, if that name sounds familiar, it should. More on that later. Dole understood something most outsiders didn't. Hawaii was a gold mine, and the monarchy stood in the way. So the plan was simple: end the kingdom, and replace it with a government they could control. In 1887, Dole joined forces with a network of wealthy elites, businessmen, landowners, and shipping tycoons to form the Hawaiian League. Another key figure was Lorrin Thurston, a sugar baron and grandson of missionaries. They'd all built fortunes on Hawaiian soil, and they weren't afraid to get their hands dirty to protect it. July 6, 1887, the League forced King Kalakaua to sign what became known as the Bayonet Constitution, named quite literally because they used guns to make him do it. That document stripped power from the monarchy. It took voting rights away from most native Hawaiians and handed political control to wealthy foreign landowners. Behind them stood the Honolulu Rifles, a private militia that acted as the League's personal enforcers. And while the Bayonet Constitution was imposed, it was never actually ratified by Hawaii's legislature, so its legality is still questionable even to this day. But their ambitions didn't stop with Kalakaua. When his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, came to power, everything changed. She spoke English, German, and French. She was a composer, a scholar, and had a sharp political mind. And she knew exactly what these businessmen wanted: total control, not just of the sugar trade, but of Hawaii's future. And she wasn't about to just hand it over. January 14th, 1893, the Queen proposed a new constitution, one that would restore voting rights to native Hawaiians and reduce foreign influence. It was bold, but to the sugar barons, it was terrifying. If she succeeded, they'd lose it all: profits, power, political control. So first they panicked, and then they plotted. You see, their reach extended beyond the islands and into Washington. Enter John L. Stevens, the US Minister to Hawaii. Basically what we'd call a US ambassador today. He was supposed to be neutral, but he wasn't. He wanted to skip negotiations entirely and just take the country. He wrote letters back to Washington, D.C. talking about Hawaii like it was a piece of fruit. Literally, he called it the ripe fruit of the Pacific. The Queen didn't know it yet, but the annexation plan was already in motion. January 16, 1893. Queen Liliuokalani moves to enact her new constitution. It was her right as the sovereign leader of a recognized nation. That same day, a group calling themselves the Committee of Safety made their move. Same men, new name. These were the usual players, the Hawaiian League, the Annexation Club. They loved giving themselves fancy faction titles. Led by Sanford Dole, 13 wealthy American and European businessmen took the lead. But they couldn't do it alone. At 4:30 p.m., working hand in hand with Minister Stevens, they gave the order. 162 U.S. Marines land in Honolulu from the USS Boston. Publicly, Stevens claimed neutrality, but neutrality doesn't exactly look like 162 armed Marines surrounding a palace. The message was clear: resist and face the devastating might of the U.S. military. January 17, 1893. Just one day after her attempt to enact her new constitution, Queen Liliuokalani formally yields her authority, not to the businessmen, but to the United States. Her exact words: "I yield to the superior force of the United States." She knew exactly who was behind the coup. The businessmen were merely the glove. America was the iron fist inside. Her letter of surrender explicitly stated that her authority was yielded under protest, with the hope that the US government would undo the illegal overthrow and restore justice. She didn't abdicate, she didn't give up, she appealed, diplomatically and peacefully. But within hours, Sanford Dole was installed as president of a new provisional government. There were no elections, no vote, just 13 men with the US military support taking over a nation at gunpoint. The queen was out, the crown was gone, and the theft was complete. But the real crime was just beginning. Queen Liliuokalani didn't stay silent. She sent envoys to Washington demanding an investigation. And to his credit, newly elected President Grover Cleveland actually listened. He dispatched James Blount, a former congressman from Georgia, to get the truth. Blount spent months in Hawaii. He interviewed everyone, locals, officials, even American settlers. What he found was damning. He confirmed the US minister had acted without authorization, the Marines weren't neutral, they were an invading force, and most importantly, the Hawaiian people wanted their queen and their kingdom back. President Cleveland called the overthrow an act of war, and it was committed without congressional approval. So, President Cleveland demanded action. He asked Sanford Dole to step down and restore the monarchy. Dole's response? A flat no. He claimed the provisional government was legitimate. He bet that the US wouldn't risk using force to put the queen back on the throne. And he was right. And here's where American politics and the power of money got ugly. The sugar lobby in America was massive. They had deep pockets and even deeper connections within the halls of US power. The provisional government controlled Hawaii's ports, its military, and most importantly, its economy. And they weren't about to let some island queen get in the way of trade deals and profits. While President Cleveland pushed for restoration of the monarchy, annexation supporters in Congress dug in. They flooded newspapers, lobbied lawmakers, and blocked every attempt to return power to Queen Liliuokalani. And they knew they could afford to play the waiting game. This stalemate dragged on from December of 1893 to January of 1894. Hawaiian locals would call it Black Week. President Cleveland sent US warships and aimed their guns at Honolulu in a staged show of force. In reality, there were no invasion orders, but this was just meant to pressure the provisional government into surrender. It was a showdown between a president trying to undo a coup and businessmen who had already cashed in. They undermined President Cleveland's diplomacy, fortified their grip, and made their message clear: they weren't giving Hawaii back. July 4th, 1894. While America celebrated its independence, Sanford Dole declared Hawaii a republic, with himself as president. Voting rights was restricted to white property owners and their allies. Native Hawaiians who had been the political majority were now shut out of their own government. The Hawaiian language was banned in schools. Kids were beaten for speaking Hawaiian. Traditional chants, hula, even belief systems were branded as primitive, or worse, criminal. The entire system was built to make one outcome inevitable: annexation. And everything they did, from land laws to foreign policy, was designed to bind Hawaii to the US so tightly that independence would be impossible. By 1895, the people of Hawaii had had enough. Robert Wilcox, a native Hawaiian who had trained in the Italian military academies, launched a rebellion to restore the monarchy. It was bold, organized, and entirely homegrown. But the provisional government crushed it and Wilcox was captured. The Queen, who had always tried to avoid bloodshed, was arrested and charged with treason. The trial, if you want to call it that, was conducted by a military tribunal in her own throne room. She was convicted, fined $5,000, and confined to a single room in her own palace. For 8 months, she was imprisoned and subjected to constant surveillance, isolated, silenced, and forced to watch as her country's language, customs, and identity were erased, piece by piece. April 21st, 1898. America goes to war with Spain. Suddenly, Hawaii is more than sugar. It becomes a military asset, a strategic launch pad for the Pacific. And just like that, the moral debate about Hawaiian sovereignty swept aside. The conversation in Congress shifts. No more debate about Hawaiian sovereignty. No more mention of the Queen or the Blount Report or the fact that the US had helped overthrow a friendly government. Now it's all about national interest and manifest destiny. One US Senator, Henry Cabot Lodge, stood in front of Congress and argued that Hawaiians were, quote, not capable of self-government and needed America to guide them. And right beside him was the man who introduced the resolution that would make it official, Francis G. Newlands, a congressman from Nevada who was wealthy, well-connected, and committed to American expansion. He didn't come from Hawaii, he didn't know its people, but he knew the power of land and empire. He authored the Newlands Resolution, the bill that would officially annex Hawaii into the United States. July 7th, 1898. As war with Spain dominates headlines, Congress turned its focus overseas, and in the chaos, Hawaii slipped through the cracks. Annexation was rushed, pushed through in the fog of war. President William McKinley picked up his pen. With a signal signature, he made it official. The Newlands Resolution passed. And just like that, the Kingdom of Hawaii was officially gone. Legally, it's still debated to this day. In response, virtually the entire native Hawaiian population signed the Coup petitions demanding that annexation be stopped. They delivered those petitions straight to Congress, but not a single native Hawaiian was invited to speak. No one read their names into the record. No one listened. Sanford Dole had finally done it, and while he was toppling a monarchy, his cousin James Dole was finishing his studies at Harvard. Not a politician, not a soldier, he was studying agriculture. And in 1899, just 1 year after the annexation, James Dole landed in Hawaii. It wasn't coincidence, it was timing. With the kingdom gone and US laws in place, American businessmen were free to move in. James Dole founded the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, the firm that would become Dole Food Company. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a direct beneficiary of a stolen kingdom, building an empire on land taken by force and questionable law. And native Hawaiians, once the stewards of these lands, they became laborers, working for the descendants of the men who stole their country. Queen Liliuokalani died in 1917. She left behind music, memoirs, and a written record of everything that had been taken. The legacy was not only the loss of a kingdom, it's also the rise of a business empire, because while Hawaiian sovereignty was dismantled, Dole was just getting started. August 21st, 1959. More than 60 years after the Queen surrendered under protest, and more than 60 years after the land was taken, the United States makes it official. Hawaii becomes a 50th state. But by then, the kingdom was gone, and the empire that rose in its place wore a sticker that said Dole. What began as a local fruit company, built in the aftermath of a political takeover, became a global brand. To this day, the descendants of those sugar barons, families like Dole and Castle, own massive chunks of Hawaiian real estate, land that was taken, consolidated, and passed down across generations. Meanwhile, many native Hawaiians can't afford to live in their own homeland. The median home price in Hawaii is among the highest in America. Generational wealth was stolen, and the descendants of those displaced are still paying the price. And the numbers tell the story. In 1890, native Hawaiians made up about 45% of the population. Today, they're less than 10%. But the spirit of resistance didn't die, it evolved. In the 1970s, a cultural revival began, known as the Hawaiian Renaissance. This cultural resurgence ignited a fire of political activism. Native Hawaiians began demanding recognition of their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and a long overdue acknowledgement of the illegal overthrow. And in 1993, exactly 100 years after the coup, the US government passed the Apology Resolution, formally admitting that what happened was illegal and unjust. It was a start, but for many, words without restitution meant very little. Today, when you see a can of pineapple with that familiar Dole logo in a grocery store, the bright colors, the sunburst, the promise of paradise, just remember, behind it is the story of a corporate coup. Land was taken, a queen overthrown, and an entire kingdom was folded into a business plan. James Dole never faced scrutiny for how he built his empire. Sanford Dole was never held accountable for helping destroy a kingdom. The Dole Food Company went global, expanding into dozens of countries, controlling supply chains, and becoming one of the most recognizable fruit brands on Earth. And to this day, Dole has never formally acknowledged the role its founding family played in the overthrow of Hawaii's government. No apology, no restitution. In fact, Dole's marketing still leans on the myth of the Hawaiian paradise. Palm trees, island breezes, and golden fruit. No mention of the coup, no mention of the stolen kingdom that made it all possible. And the Dole brand is still shining, still selling, because the fruit company that helped overthrow a nation didn't just survive history, it rebranded it, canned it, and sold it to you.